Hey, what's up everyone? In a previous video, I highlighted the Shadows of the Empire cell sheet. It's not a poster, but again, on the back, for those who haven't seen the video, it's a description for retailers about this multimedia project. And in this case, there's a lot of narrative here, if you haven't seen the previous video, about what this multimedia project was all about. In fact, what is a multimedia project? Telling you that there's going to be basically a new era of Star Wars storytelling and that it's going to be all connected. And there's going to be a stream of different products from different licensees, so get in while the getting's good. Now, this is not the only sell sheet. There's one other, and it's this one. Now, this one is, for some reason, slightly harder to find, although you do still see it come up. But the really interesting challenge with sometimes finding these types of sell sheets is that sellers don't know what they have, and so they mislabel these things. I think sometimes unintentionally, sometimes somewhat deceptively, I think, to sort of draw in a broader collector's audience. What you sometimes see things like this sold as and promoted as are posters. I mean, fair enough, right? If you don't know much more about it, they're really neat images. You could certainly frame these things, even though they're only about 8 by 5 by 11. They're basically the size of a standard sheet of paper. A good rule of thumb, particularly when you're searching on places like eBay and other secondary markets, if you don't have direct physical access to the product to examine it, if someone calls something a poster, but it looks like it's just ripped out of a magazine or a comic book, it's not a poster, it's just a print ad. Another good, very, very general, underline general rule of thumb about posters for obsessive poster collectors like myself is that if something is described as a poster, but it's only about 8 by 11 or smaller, in other words, something that could have been ripped out of a magazine, it's very likely something like this or just a print ad. In any event, it's really neat. I mean, even though this one here has got the sort of the cover image, there is something slightly more appealing about this, and it might just be that obviously this is highly stylized, whereas this is a little bit more colorful, but it's highly sought after. And in any event, these represent sort of the two main sell sheets for the multimedia project. Now, unlike the back of this, which is a bit more narrative based and almost in some sense trying to set up what the very idea of the multimedia project is, what's very helpful about this, particularly for collectors, is that this actually ran down the full list at the time of licensees and licensed products. It's pretty cool. You know, and again, there's some sort of general description here about what the narrative of the project is all about. But beginning here in April, again, a brief rundown of the Shadows line and approximate dates when items will be available. And again, this is all, you know, very sort of fluid at the time, right? But obviously kicking things off in April, Bantam Books with the novel and audio novel. And then into May, we really kick things into high gear with the wonderful reference guide, The Secrets, The Shadows of the Empire. Obviously the Dark Horse Comics run, and as we know, there were sequels and follow-ups to that. And one thing I don't think is even mentioned in here is that there were obviously West End game related supplements, which again, this just continued to grow and grow in sophistication. Obviously the soundtrack, which is really cool, and interestingly, only was it maybe 2 years ago, the same licensee put out for the first time a vinyl release of the soundtracks. That's definitely something to also track down. Xanart Entertainment Chromium Prints. This is something that we're going to have to talk about at some point in a future video. Chromium were very, very 90s looking prints with, they were iconic images from Star Wars and even the expanded universe that were essentially sort of pre-framed with a mat, but a very 90s looking mat. You just have to sort of see it to know what I'm talking about, but we'll talk about them in a future video. And actually, Chromium has become a great place all these years later to track down some images which are getting harder and harder to find. For instance, things like Dark Forces cover art and some early John Berkey artwork. In any event, it's a fun licensee that we'll have to talk about. Now, look at this, changes t-shirts, fresh caps, baseball caps. Very few people even believe that there's actually an officially licensed line of Shadows of the Empire clothing. And I will show a official Shadows of the Empire t-shirt in a future video to prove that it does exist. When you think Shadows and you think this multimedia, you know, event, think broadly. If you can imagine it, it probably existed. The pewter keychains, which you can still find, obviously the action figure line, but you know, the micro machines, the toys, and this is interesting too. Take a look at Rolling Thunder graphics with the lithograph and one sheet poster. The other thing that some people don't know about, because it's becoming scarcer and scarcer, is that there's also an official poster of the wonderful cover art from Shadows of the Empire, and I'll show that also in a future video. Obviously the the card set by the Hildebrands, all of these applause figures, which you can still find. This Shizor mask in hands, that's also something that it's still somewhat available, and you still see that every once in a while. It is funny with some of this stuff though, and I think I've told this in future videos, going back to the t-shirt, there's a Shadows of the Empire t-shirt that, for instance, just has the face of Shizor on the front, which, for those not familiar with Shadows of the Empire, tend to just assume it's the Incredible Hulk, which is really funny. And I wonder what it would have been like for that first Halloween for people to go out dressed as Shizor. Would folks know? It's kind of funny to think about. This is cool too, the Boxing Collector's Card of Dark Horse covers. There's a lot of, that's a very like late 80s, 90s thing to do, you know, kind of part of the wave of trading card mania back in the day, but there's lots of these like box tin sets of cards related to Star Wars that again are still on the whole pretty available. And then obviously into the games, the LucasArts games, you know, N64 games, and the tie-ins to those like the strategy guide. So these are cool not just for the artwork, not just for the sort of collector value, not just for the sort of the promo related value, but also for the information it provides about the events on the back, right down to the licensees, making it a lot easier to track this stuff down and to ultimately even create the most robust checklist of all Shadows of the Empire stuff available. So anyway, more promos to come. See you next time.